So after Carlos Correa signs, there's one more premium shortstop, and that's Dansby Swanson. And when you look at the best remaining position player free agents and using the steamer projections from fangraphs.com, Dansby Swanson is number one as the best player available with the projected WAR of 3.2 for the 2023 season. Now, for those that are watching on YouTube, you'll see that Omar Narvaez is number 4 on this list. He just signed with the New York Mets right before we started recording this podcast. So he's no longer at number 4. And you mentioned the White Sox invested more resources in addressing the outfield. The third best player remaining free agent, according to Steamers, Andrew Benintendi. But there's word that the Yankees and Astros are both interested in Benintendi. So that could really escalate or inflate, I should say, the type of contract that Andrew Benintendi ends up signing. And he may be too expensive for the White Sox. But there are 2 players that I see on this list that are in the top 5 best remaining position player free agents that intrigue me. One is Elvis Andrus. And we know he played really well for the White Sox late. And his steamer projected WAR is 1.9. And we can put into reality the hypothetical we talked about at the end of the season, Jim, of what if Andrus moves over to second base and Tim Anderson stays at shortstop, and that's your middle infield. But number 2 on this list is former Philadelphia Phillies second baseman Jean Segura. And Steamer has a projected WAR value of 2.6 for Jean Segura for the 2023 season. What do you think about that possibility, Jim, of the White Sox investing a little more than maybe $10 million for a season to bring Jean Segura to the South Side to help solidify the second base position?
I would be okay with it. Like, it wouldn't thrill me just because, like, he's one of those players, like, who, kind of similar to, he's like Adam Frazier plus or something like that, where, like, doesn't strike out much, doesn't walk much, runs a little bit, hits for a little power, hits for a decent average, although that's falling a little bit, but plays, an erratic style of play, which I think is a little bit out of control, as we saw in the postseason, for better or for worse, like, makes things happen, but also, I guess makes some things happen that you don't want to see. I kind of see like Elvis Andrus on the other end of being like the more buttoned down version of that player. Like, he's somebody whose bat can disappear, but he'll play steady defense and pretty smart base runner, and generally does all the little things well. It's just more of a matter of the bigger things, like the bigger production. Like Segura, offers a little bit more in terms of offensive upside, at least historically. What Andrus did last year for the White Sox was amazing. And it seemed like almost designed to show, like, oh, imagine if the White Sox were actually competent in other regards, what kind of difference Andrus could have made. But unfortunately, like, the flaws were too strong. But that's kind of how I look at these 2 players. The problem, I think, is when the White Sox sign somebody like Segura, or they sign someone like Andrus, with hopes of solving a position with adequacy, like, just, hoping for, like, it's 2 wins. We don't need much from this guy, like a 2-win player, like somebody will hit 270 and have an OBP of 310 and hit double-digit homers. That's when they get the performance that kind of craters on them. Like, they hope for 2 wins and they get like 0.3 or negative 0.2. And then he's, DFA'd in July, like thinking like Adam Eaton and Jeff Keppinger and all these, just these terrible 1-year deals that have amounted to nothing. Nomar Mazara was another one. There's everybody they put in the right field, John Jay. So when they, like Todd Frazier is the counterpoint to where, like, he was like a 4 to 5 win player. He ended up being like a 2 to 3, kind of 3+ win guy with the White Sox, like one of the more unsatisfying 40 homer seasons you'll have. But because he had that upside, even a disappointing season was okay for them. Like, that's kind of how I feel like the White Sox have to think about position players, because when they try to get that okay guy, Cesar Hernandez, another one, for whatever reason, the production just tends to disappear. So that's why I wouldn't be excited. Not necessarily anything Segura does or Andrus does, but just because of historically, the way the White Sox have identified talent. Like that talent seems to evaporate. And even when they move on to other teams, it's just gone.
Yeah. And so if you are not crazy about Segura and you're not crazy about Andrews, those are the best remaining middle infielders in free agency for everyone, including for White Sox targets. When you look at the outfield, I mentioned Benintendi. The next best available is Michael Conforto. Steamer thinks that Conforto is a 1.6 WAR season. It's really hard to project what Conforto is going to do in 2023 because he missed all of 2022 due to a shoulder injury. And then you got Michael Brantley. Speaking of shoulder problems, he's next in the list when it comes to outfielders at 1.4, according to Steamer projection. Steamer likes him as a bat, a projected OPS of 761, and the White Sox could use more left-handed bats. But if they go back to that well that I advocated for 3 years ago, Jim, that moves Eloy Jimenez from the DH spot to the outfield, and that creates problems. Two names that have been pitched to us from our Veterans Committee, so our VIPs on Patreon, they get an opportunity, by the way, to be in a chat group with Jim and I, and we text all the time. So you got Pete Hand, and Pete threw out the name Jackie Bradley Jr. as like not a great fit, but a very White Sox way of addressing the outfield is citing someone like Jackie Bradley Jr. Great on defense, can't hit anymore, but he can at least help defensively. And then we also got the other suggestion as well for Jurickson Profar. What do you make of Profar as a possibility for the White Sox?
You know, it kind of falls in the same boat in terms of just like it's a profile that just doesn't have any real strength. Like the walks shot up last year. He drew 73 of them. Like he's always had a decent eye. So I guess that would be his most reliable strength, but the batting average fluctuates on him. Doesn't have a ton of power. Like he peaked just like everybody else at 20 homers in 2019. And the power has been less impressive since. But he's all right, especially if we consider him not much of an infielder anymore and just think of him mainly as an outfielder. He can solve a position. I think the one thing I look at his track record, and you look at his wins total or his WAR total. He seems to have really a Reggie Sanders type thing, a Brett Saberhagen type thing, who predated Sanders in terms of every other year he's good, and the other year is terrible. Like I'm looking at his wins total, like 2017 replacement level 0.0, 2018 1.7, 2019 negative 0.1. 2020 in 56 games, 1.3, really good season. 2021, 0.0. 2022, 3.1. So finally, like the kind of year that everybody thought he might have when he was a top prospect. But if that trend holds, then 2023 is going to be another just hot potato, left just, holding the bag for a guy who just, oscillates between great aromas and terrible ones. If you're thinking about the fan, just what that's providing. So that's, again, a little bit, I guess, not based entirely on numbers, just more of a feel for how the White Sox do things and just the kind of signing. But I would want to think a little more upside, but better than what the White Sox have, addresses a weakness that the White Sox, persistently deal with in terms of just struggling to draw walks. And I would be more open to it than I think it would excite me a little bit more than Segura or Andrews, just because of that one strength he does provide.
I know we're grasping at straws here, listeners and watchers for the White Sox, but this is just the reality of the market. Usually you still have some premium free agents available when you get into January or maybe even February, like Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. They didn't sign until late January, early February. I think Bryce Harper may have signed when spring training had already started. That's when he finally signed with the Philadelphia Phillies. That's not the case this year. The market has been moving very quickly. You're down to, when you look at the position player front, you're down to Dansby Swanson. And then after Swanson, the best available position player free agents are going to be Jean Segura, Andrew Benintendi. Omar Narvaez just signed with the Mets. So the next on the list is like Elvis Andrews, Justin Turner, question marks like Michael Conforto and Joey Gallo. and Michael Brantley. Like, the well is starting to dry up. And if the White Sox are going to make a move, they're going to have to make a move pretty soon to address the outfield. Or if they're going to make a trade, good luck. Because I think the teams right now, especially the other contenders, they're starting to see the well dry up and they may be pivoting. Some teams have already pivoted to the trade market, like the Atlanta Braves getting Sean Murphy. We didn't even talk about that. The Braves making a big trade there, a 3-team trade along with Milwaukee and Oakland. There's that Milwaukee team again, continuing to make trades and making trades happen, not waiting out the market as they continue to throw shade at Rick Hahn and his offseason strategy. They're not going to be able to wait another month. The White Sox are going to have to do something, I assume, before Christmas, which is just 10 days away, and no later than January 1st to address the outfield. Or they're just going to, again, the well could dry up on the White Sox here pretty quickly. And then we're having real conversations of Eloy Jimenez or Gavin Sheets is going to have to be the opening day left fielder. And Lenyn Sosa is probably your opening day second baseman, along with another rookie, Oscar Colas, being your opening day right fielder. And that is a pretty big risk the White Sox are taking going to 2023, Jim.
Yeah. Is there anything more?
No, that's well stated.
Yeah, it's the reality in the White Sox, it's funny. I went to the whitesox.com and the headline on, not the Scott Merkin story, because it's a different headline, but the headline showing on the homepage is White Sox, quote unquote, patient and quote unquote, diligent this offseason. And like, yeah. And patience, it feels like a euphemistic way to, present inaction. And, in the group chat, we're talking and just like, it seemed like all these moves being made, and it seems like Rick Hahn is just, as we've talked about, as I've written about, such a high leverage off season. So, now it appears pretty precious few resources. So they kind of have to be used right. And I think Mike Clevenger has shown to be like an okay move based on the way the pitching market is really inflated in price. Like, I feel okay with that one, but it seems like the next move, whether it's, using the money they have left or trading Liam Hendricks, they have to like make sure these moves are right. So I can picture him like trying to jump on the carousel that's like moving faster than he wants. And just like every time the spot, comes around, he like lunges forward a little bit, but then pulls himself back. Like, he'll wait for the next turn, and just eventually, the ride's going to be over, and he'll not have enjoyed it, which I guess makes him like everybody else when it comes to enjoying the ride. But yeah, that's kind of how I'm looking at it, is just eventually either he's got to make a move, or the White Sox are going to go back to spinning how, once these guys come back from injury, it's like we made additions, and the trade deadline is, we're going to be next looking to add, which he said before.